I know what you're thinking. Oh, here's a patriot, a Trumpster, an anti-jabber, and I'm none of those things. I'm a veteran. I don't believe something until I research it myself. I pick issues, not sides, and I don't trust politicians. When have we ever? When did that ever become a thing? I think politicians are like diapers. They should be changed regularly. New faces bring fresh ideas and perspectives to the government. Now, this video has nothing to do whether the jab works. This is strictly about my research and why 80 million people haven't received it and their thinking behind this decision.
Hasn't that ever occurred to you, man? Sir?
No, Mr. Lebowski, it had not occurred to me.
That had not occurred to us, dude.
Well, okay, you guys aren't privy to all the new so, but hey, that's what you pay me for.
It's not about whether you should get it or not. That's a conversation to be had with your family and your doctor. This has nothing to do with influencing whether you go and get it. Period. My goal is to close the divide and stop the fighting.
No fighting. Wait! No fighting. No f***ing fighting. No fighting. No fighting!
Now, even though I've said all of that and made very clear what this video is not about, a particular platform will still probably restrict my reach. This is why I went to Twitter. I'll put my Twitter handle down in the description. Because of this, I will refer to a certain doctor as F and his replacement as J. I will refer to the disease as C19 and the procedure to receive the treatment as the jab. I'm probably not fooling the algorithm at all, but it's worth a shot. When Dr. F began talking about the asymptomatic spread of C19,
is that what we're dealing with right now is community spread in the context of a substantial proportion of the people who are getting infected do not know they're infected, they're not symptomatic, they're asymptomatic individuals.
He created a panic that shut down schools, businesses, put masks on people's faces for more than a year, and made Americans view their fellow citizens as mortal threats. Yet in January of 2020, he told reporters that asymptomatic spread was not a driver of respiratory viruses.
But the one thing historically people need to realize, that even if there is some asymptomatic transmission, in all the history of respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks. The driver of outbreaks is always a symptomatic person. Even if there's a rare asymptomatic person that might transmit, an epidemic is not driven by asymptomatic carriers.
Let's rewind to the 80s.
When you say other close contact, give me some examples.
Well, for example, if the close contact of a child is a household contact, perhaps there will be a certain number of cases of individuals who are just living with and in close contact with someone with AIDS or at risk of AIDS who does not necessarily have to have intimate sexual contact or share a needle, but just the ordinary close contact that one sees in normal interpersonal relations.
During the HIV crisis, Dr. F created a similar panic about transmission. He speculated that the virus could spread through regular household contact based on detecting the infection in an infant. The media at once seized on this assertion and created a panic and an unfortunate stigma for those infected. At the time, other researchers had advanced the idea of blood and body fluid routes of transmission evidence provided by the transmission pattern. Remember that. It's going to come up again later. The media largely ignored these researchers in favor of Dr. F's more startling speculation. Dr. F's history is only one factor in this complicated equation, which I will attempt to simplify. Let's call that last bit reason number one. Speculation without evidence. It can't be easy to be a doctor and guess about a new pandemic or disease, but I think it responsible for being mindful of what you say, especially as a professional with such a valuable position. He set our whole policy. I always see stuff like this on social media from actors, other famous people, and regulars like you and me. They state something as fact, but they didn't do any research. One would think that a doctor would not publish or make a statement without having done the same. Now, Dr. F, like any other, is allowed to be wrong. People make mistakes, sure, but others were banned entirely. Dr. F and the WHO were the only people that we were allowed to listen to, and they even conflicted with each other, which brings us to the next reason. Number 2, censorship. During the pandemic, if you said anything that wasn't already said by Dr. F or the WHO, you were banned, blocked, or buried in the feed. Not only other doctors, but elected officials with many more resources at their disposal than you and I. So I can't hear about other professionals' opinions or those of my representatives and then take that to my doctor and have a conversation. You would deny me that? You would rob us of the choice to think for ourselves? What about the treatment of hydroxy? Yeah, that's what I'm going to call it. Need I say why? Full stop. Time for another disclaimer. I am not saying hydroxy is an effective treatment for C19. I can't, because nobody was allowed to finish testing it properly. That brings us to reason number 3. James Kiley is the director of the Division of Lung Diseases at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, had a press release where he said, "We know that hydroxy has shown some potential promise from early clinical experiences. It has demonstrated antiviral activity, an ability to modify the activity of the immune system. It has established safety profile at appropriate doses, leading to the hypothesis that it may also be useful in treating C19. However, until we have rigorous clinical trial data, we do not know conclusively if giving hydroxy to patients with C19 helps them recover and is safe." End quote. Seems reasonable, but why did he say safe when we know it's safe to take anyway? And it's a primary treatment for lupus. Remember when researchers in the 80s were saying about blood and body fluid transmission of HIV and were ignored? Let's briefly look at the history of hydroxy and what it is. Humans have used it for about 400 years. The original molecule, quinoline, comes from the bark of a tree and was used to treat malaria in the 1600s. The drug has shown some ability in lab tests to work against several viruses, including C19 type viruses and influenza. One study from France showed some benefits, but was immediately shot down and discredited because of how the study was conducted. I have no comment or opinion on that because I can't find any evidence to back it, so that very well may be true. But this is factual, and I found the data to back it up. The ORCID study, dedicated solely to see if hydroxy was effective treatment, began in April 2020 to end just 2 months later. The problem I have with that is it only works after a period of time. It could be 12 weeks or longer before you notice any benefit. We've known that for some 400 years, so why was the study stopped so soon? I can only guess why alternative treatments from natural medicines would be banned or reclassified as Schedule I drugs above opioids like OxyContin, a drug that has killed an estimated 500,000 Americans, not just people, Americans, since the turn of the century. Fentanyl, methamphetamine, I mean, really? Those are all classified as Schedule II drugs, with marijuana being higher at the highest classification, stating it has no medical value. And guess what? Marijuana deaths, 0. Coca leaf deaths, 0. Cot root deaths, 0. OxyContin, 500,000. It's also ludicrous to have marijuana as Schedule I drug, stating it has no medical value when we've known that to be a lie for over a century. But it's a gateway drug, you might say. And you're right, it is. The FDA made it a gateway drug by lying to the DEA. They lied to our parents, and as a result, when some of us inevitably tried it, didn't freak out on the couch and smash up our kitchens, we thought, what else are they lying about? Well, stay tuned, because new information has come to light, and the House is investigating the FDA and Biogen, a drug manufacturer. To disallow natural plants that take acres and massive amount of work to process into something more potent and illegal? Why? It makes no sense why Americans can't have a coca plant, much like they do an aloe vera plant, to treat headaches or toothaches, except maybe somebody wants you to reach for that aspirin instead. Which brings us to reason 4. Pfizer made over $36 billion in 2021 and hoped to produce 4 billion jabs in 2022. Revenue for 2022 is roughly the same, but I can't say with certainty. I think it would be higher with the boosters and the variants. And now they're making jabs for children. Add on my recent discovery that Pfizer is selling a three-pill jab to China with no U.S. involvement. So we funded the research, and they are now profiting off of it. Follow the money. So the pandemic has been very profitable for Pfizer, I'm sure, and other companies as well. What about the trust? Let's not forget about Pfizer's $2.3 billion settlement with the Department of Justice over its illegal marketing of Bextra and other drugs. And SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, an antidepressant hailed as the change your life drug, like Cymbalta, Pristiq, Effexor, the list goes on. We've recently discovered they don't work, and we've been using them since 1983. The marketing was ridiculous. Take a look.
Depression is a serious medical condition. I feel like I have to wind myself up to deal with the sadness, the loss of interest, the lack of energy.
Pristiq is thought to work. Pristiq is thought to work. Thought to work.
Thought to work? So you mean they don't know?
By affecting the levels of two chemicals in the brain, serotonin and norepinephrine. Antidepressants can increase suicidal thoughts.
Suicidal thoughts. That's okay. Why not?
Taking Pristiq with NSAID pain relievers, aspirin, or blood thinners may increase bleeding risk.
So you can't even take friggin' aspirin?
Tell your doctor about all your medications, including those for migraine, to avoid a potentially life-threatening condition.
Life-threatening condition. We'll just walk right past that.
For me, Pristiq is a key in helping me treat my depression.
Is it though?
Every day, millions of adults taking medication for depression believe the myth that they can't change anything about the depression symptoms they're still experiencing. The reality, if you're taking an antidepressant but still dealing with depression, it could be your time for change. In a recent government study, over 70% of patients taking an antidepressant continue to have unresolved symptoms.
Over 70% of people taking antidepressants still have unresolved symptoms. So we'll package up something new, the same thing, but call it something new. But this time, watch.
So visit yourtimeforchange.com for a DVD that has information on depression and a prescription medication.
So now they don't have to list off all the side effects. Really, we'll just give you a DVD. That'll solve it. Here.
Major depressive disorder, otherwise known as MDD, is characterized by a pervasive and persistent low mood, a loss of interest or pleasure in normally enjoyable activities, changes in weight and healthy sleep patterns, and thoughts of suicide. The condition is a leading cause of disability.
The leading cause of disability? Really?
And according to the World Health Organization is the fourth leading contributor to global burden of disease.
The fourth global contributor. Really? Where do they get this stuff? Breaking news! As of Friday, December 3rd, which is today, House report identifies unusual collaboration between FDA and drug maker Biogen. A joint investigation released by the House Energy, Commerce, Oversight, and Reform Committees identified unusual collaboration between the Food and Drug Administration and the drug maker Biogen. The report pointed to undocumented interactions between the FDA and Biogen and the preparation of unusual joint briefing document for a key advisory committee as atypical and rife with irregularities. So that's how they come up with this stuff. Pharmaceutical companies donate to 2/3 of Congress, according to OpenSecrets.org. And I have a problem with that. When an executive retires from one of these companies, they will often go and work for the FDA, which seems like a conflict of interest. So there's a lot to this. It goes deep, and I'm sure you can understand why a company that profits from medication would not want you to use natural medicines for a remedy instead. Maybe that's why we haven't cured HIV. You take one pill every day for the rest of your life, and your viral load is undetectable. They can do that, but they can't cure it? I find that hard to believe, especially when they can have customers for life, not unlike cigarette companies that had reps handing them out to children on playgrounds, and Barney and Fred Flintstone smoking. They wanted lifelong customers. This is reason 5. Mistrust of the companies making the jab. If you want to know more about pharmaceutical companies, their tactics, FDA labels, the whole system, you should watch a movie called Dope Sick on Hulu. It's very well done, and Michael Keaton stars in it. And this is from IMDb. The series takes viewers from the epicenter of America's struggle with opioid addiction, from the boardrooms of Purdue Pharma to a distressed Virginia mining community to the halls of the DEA. That description just doesn't do it justice. The movie gives you an in-depth look into what happened, bringing entertainment along with it, of course. Here in the U.S., we pay more for prescriptions per capita than in any other country. And the things these companies get away with is mind-blowing. Estimated 500,000 deaths from opioids, mainly from one company owned by the Sacklers, who never saw a single charge or indictment, who ran campaigns and came up with new medical terms like breakthrough pain. That's not a real thing. Look it up. They found a peer-reviewed article in an old medical magazine and ran with it. The doctor that wrote it didn't even know. They used it to increase the doses as patients developed tolerance and became addicted, something the company promised was not possible. They bought strippers for doctors, gave them expensive gifts. I could go on, but I don't want to spoil the movie. That's a severe problem. And reason number 6, the opioid epidemic. That pain chart with the smiley faces your doctor shows you, Purdue Pharma made that to sell pills. 32% aren't jabbed and probably never will be. They do not trust the companies that make them or the ones doing the censoring. This has led to people not using traditional jabs on their children, proven regular RNA jabs that prevent polio and the like. When you censor information, wrong or not, and you prop up untrustworthy companies, this is the result. Now people aren't jabbing their children with proven and safe jabs. That's just freaking great. Interestingly, we now need a C-19 shot with the flu shot every year. Customers for life, right? I find it interesting that children now must get the jab despite being the lowest risk group. More customers. I'm not saying they don't work. I'm not saying to get it or not. I'm pointing out why so many people do not have it and will likely never get it. They distrust the people who would ask social media companies to censor information, acting as if we can't think for ourselves. They question those same people for putting their trust into for-profit pharmaceutical companies with terrible track records. They question those same companies making the treatment. The 32% unjabbed is a result of this administration's policies. I think Trump, like him or not, understood this when he said he would have the military look at it before it was distributed. I think he understood the disconnect between the American people who know about these things and the companies with the resources to supply the treatment. I think it was a big mistake to censor the information. It was a big mistake to bypass the safeguard between the consumer and these companies that obviously so many Americans do not trust for good reasons, as my research has found. I think it's a mistake to misschedule plants. I think it's wrong of the government to accept money from these companies that killed 500,000 Americans. And I think it's a mistake not to hold those responsible accountable for their actions. That's why about 80 million people are not jabbed and probably never will be. The problem, at least to me, is evident and easy to fix. You cannot work for the FDA if you've ever worked for a pharmaceutical company. The FDA needs to be reworked from the ground up, the current board disbanded, and regulations put on pharmaceutical companies to renew trust and no more donations. But money's going places, politicians can't be trusted, and corporations always seem to put profit over safety. Like death and taxes, it all seems inevitable. After researching this, I better understand the position that 80 million people take on this issue. I hope you do as well and can show some compassion, educate instead of argue and insult. Have healthy debates and conversations instead of calling names. And don't let this issue divide us. Calling these people anti-jabbers, you know what I mean, is too broad of a term. I found that most of this group have had their original jabs, and so do their children. Antitrusters? I don't know. Might be a better word. Either way, compassion and understanding will close the divide. Now that you and I understand this, we may have more constructive conversations about the issue. And when you see an organization doing the opposite, pinning us against each other, think about who benefits the most if we are divided. Love and peace to all. Stay free. Have a happy new year. 2023 is going to be bad, so make those resolutions accordingly. I'm out.